In the vast expanse of the Galactic Confederation, where 37 different species had found peace after millennia of war, one truth remained constant. Humans were considered the weakest link. No natural armor like the Krillians. No telepathic abilities like the Zephyrians. No centuries-long lifespans like the Eternals. Just stubborn persistence and an annoying habit of refusing to stay down when beaten. So when Princess Lyrelei of the vampire-like Sanguinari announced she would choose her consort from among all species in the galaxy, not just the noble bloodlines, the cosmic elite laughed. When the most powerful princes from the mightiest civilizations began their elaborate courtship displays, spending fortunes on gifts that could buy entire star systems, the laughter grew louder. But when a human maintenance worker from the space station's lower decks accidentally crashed into her during a routine repair job, covering them both in coolant fluid and sparking cables, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in her 300-year life, Princess Lyrelei smiled genuinely. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful choice isn't about strength, longevity, or cosmic influence. Sometimes it's about finding someone who sees you not as a princess, not as a political alliance, but simply as you. And humans, despite all their weaknesses, had one ability that no other species in the galaxy possessed: the capacity to love without calculation, to choose heart over logic, and to fight for what they believe in even when the odds are impossible. The greatest love story in galactic history was about to unfold, and it would change everything. The massive space station Concordia Prime floated majestically in the neutral zone between three major galactic powers, its crystalline spires catching the light from twin suns. As the diplomatic heart of the Galactic Confederation, it housed representatives from every known sentient species, their various atmospheric requirements met by sophisticated environmental controls that Marcus Chen had been fighting with for the past 6 hours. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he crawled through another maintenance tunnel, his human frame barely fitting through passages designed for the more compact Zephyrian engineers who had originally built this section. The environmental systems had been acting up all week, and as the only human on the maintenance crew, he often got stuck with the jobs in spaces too small for the larger species, or too dangerous for the more delicate ones. "Stupid atmospheric processor," he muttered, reaching for his plasma torch. The Sanguinari delegation's quarters required a very specific mixture of gases, and the system kept defaulting to standard human breathable air. Not that it would kill them, but apparently it made them uncomfortable, and keeping the vampire-like species comfortable was a top priority during the princess's mate selection ceremony. Marcus had heard the gossip, of course. Princess Lyrelei, heir to the Sanguinari throne, had shocked the galaxy by announcing she would choose her consort from all species. Not just Sanguinari nobility. Every major house from every major species had sent their finest princes, each more pompous than the last. The station had been buzzing with activity for weeks as elaborate gifts arrived and political alliances were negotiated behind closed doors. He couldn't care less. Politics and royal drama were for people who had time for such things. Marcus had atmospheric processors to fix, gravity generators to maintain, and about 1,000 other systems that kept 30,000 beings breathing, eating, and not floating off into space. The plasma torch sparked to life, its blue flame casting eerie shadows in the narrow tunnel. Marcus carefully began welding a new connection, trying to ignore the way the metal groaned around him. These old stations had personality, and Concordia Prime's personality seemed to involve making ominous noises whenever anyone tried to fix anything. A soft chime indicated someone was entering the corridor above him, probably one of the delegation members heading to another pointless ceremony. Marcus focused on his work, the flame dancing, as he guided it along the joint. Almost finished, just a few more inches and the atmospheric processor would finally maintain the proper gas mixture for the sanguinary quarters. The metal groaned again, louder this time, and Marcus felt the tunnel shift slightly. He paused, torch still burning, and listened carefully. The station's superstructure was solid, but these maintenance tunnels had been added later, and sometimes the connections weren't as secure as they should be. Another groan, followed by a sharp crack that made Marcus's blood run cold. He quickly shut off the torch and started backing out of the tunnel, but he was too late. The support beam he'd been working near gave way with a screech of tearing metal, and suddenly the floor panel above him was falling, taking with it whoever had been walking across it. Marcus threw himself backward as debris rained down, but something soft and warm landed directly on top of him, driving both of them deeper into the tunnel. Sparks flew from damaged electrical systems, and the emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in angry red light. For a moment, Marcus lay stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Then, he became aware of several things simultaneously. He was covered in coolant fluid from a ruptured line. There were live electrical cables sparking dangerously close to his head, and there was definitely someone lying on top of him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, trying to turn his head to see who he'd inadvertently tackled. The response was a string of what sounded like very creative cursing in a language he didn't recognize, followed by a feminine voice speaking accented Standard Galactic. "I believe I am intact, though my dignity has suffered greatly." The voice was melodious despite the irritation, with an unusual accent that made each word sound like music. "However, there appears to be some form of electrical discharge occurring near my head." Marcus looked up and saw the sparking cable hanging just inches from both their faces. "Don't move," he said, reaching carefully for his tools. "I need to shut off the power to that line before it decides to electrocute us both." His hand found his emergency power cutter, and he carefully maneuvered it toward the cable. The person on top of him had gone very still, and he could feel her breathing against his neck as he worked. It was oddly distracting, especially since he was trying not to think about how she smelled like something between starlight and midnight rain. The cutter severed the cable with a satisfying snap, and the sparking stopped. The tunnel fell into relative quiet, broken only by the hiss of escaping coolant and the distant hum of the station's life support systems. "Okay," Marcus said. "I think it's safe to move now. But be careful, there's coolant everywhere, and the tunnel floor isn't exactly stable anymore." The woman carefully lifted herself off him, and Marcus got his first look at her face in the emergency lighting. His breath caught. She had the pale, luminous skin of the sanguinari, with high cheekbones and large eyes that seemed to hold their own inner light. Her hair was long and dark now, somewhat disheveled from their impromptu meeting, and she wore elegant clothing that had definitely not been designed for crawling around in maintenance tunnels. More importantly, she wore the subtle circlet that marked her as sanguinari royalty. Marcus's heart sank as he realized he had just tackled Princess Lyrelay into a maintenance tunnel and covered her in industrial coolant. "Your Highness," he started, scrambling to get to his feet in the cramped space. "I am so sorry. I had no idea anyone was walking above the tunnel. The structural integrity warning should have been posted. I take full responsibility for—" "Stop," she said, holding up one graceful hand. She was sitting up now, looking around the tunnel with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than the anger he'd expected. "What is your name?" "Marcus Chen, Your Highness. I'm a maintenance engineer, 3rd class. I was repairing the atmospheric processor for your delegation's quarters when the support beam failed." He was babbling now, knowing that this would probably be the end of his career and possibly his freedom. Assaulting royalty, even accidentally, was a serious offense. But Princess Lyrelay didn't look angry. If anything, she looked amused. "Marcus Chen," she repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Tell me, Marcus Chen, in your professional opinion as a maintenance engineer 3rd class, how do we get out of this tunnel?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the question. "Well, Your Highness, the main access panel is blocked by debris, but there's a secondary maintenance hatch about 20 meters that way. It leads directly to the engineering section. But it's a tight crawl, and you'll have to go through more of the coolant system." She considered this for a moment, then began pulling pins from her elaborate hairstyle. "Then we crawl. Your Highness, perhaps I should go first and get help." "You don't need to, Marcus Chen," she said, and her voice carried the kind of authority that came from being born to rule. "I have spent the past 3 weeks listening to princes recite poetry about my beauty, watching them display their wealth like peacocks showing their feathers, and enduring conversations about trade agreements disguised as romantic dinners. This is the most interesting thing that has happened to me since I arrived." She had pulled her hair back into a practical knot and was already crawling toward the secondary hatch with a grace that seemed impossible in such circumstances. Marcus hurried to follow, trying not to stare at the way she moved with fluid confidence through the narrow space. The 20-meter crawl felt like the longest journey of Marcus's life. He kept expecting her to complain about the coolant soaking through her expensive clothing, or the tight quarters, or the fact that she was crawling through maintenance tunnels like a common engineer. Instead, she asked questions. These atmospheric processors, they maintain different environmental conditions for each species? Yes, Your Highness. Temperature, pressure, gas mixture, humidity, even gravity in some sections. And you maintain all of them? I specialize in atmospheric and environmental systems, but yes, I work on whatever needs fixing. How many species requirements do you need to know? Marcus paused in his crawling, surprised by her genuine interest. All of them. 37 different atmospheric compositions, plus variations for individuals with special needs or medical conditions. She stopped moving and turned back to look at him, her eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like a cat's. You have memorized the environmental needs of 37 different species? Well, yes. You have to if you want to do the job right. Can't have someone suffocating because you mixed up the oxygen ratios. Something in her expression changed, a look he couldn't quite identify. That is remarkable. They continued crawling in companionable silence until they reached the secondary hatch. Marcus worked the manual release, and fresh air rushed in from the engineering section beyond. He climbed out first, then turned to help the princess, trying not to think about how her hand felt in his or the way she smiled when he steadied her as she stepped down. They stood in the engineering section, both covered in coolant fluid. Her expensive dress probably ruined his uniform, definitely needing replacement. The princess looked around at the massive machines that kept the station running, her expression one of fascination rather than distaste. This is where you work? Part of it. The atmospheric control center is over there, environmental monitoring is that way, and the main power distribution hub is through that door. She walked toward the atmospheric control center, studying the displays that showed the current conditions throughout the station. And from here you maintain the life support for 30,000 beings? The team does, yes. I'm just one engineer. Princess Lyrelay turned to face him fully, and Marcus was struck again by how beautiful she was, even covered in coolant with her hair escaping its knot. But more than that, she was looking at him with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing something in him that he wasn't sure was really there. Just one engineer, she repeated softly. Tell me, Marcus Chen, what do you think of the mate selection ceremony? The question caught him completely off guard. Your Highness, I don't really have opinions about political matters above my station. That wasn't what I asked. Marcus looked into her eyes and saw something that made him forget about protocols and proper behavior, and the fact that he was talking to one of the most powerful people in the galaxy. He saw someone who was genuinely asking for his honest opinion. I think, he said carefully, that anyone who chooses a life partner based on political advantage or displays of wealth is probably going to be disappointed with the results. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her eyes. And what do you think they should base such a choice on? Marcus's mouth went dry. He was very aware that they were alone in the engineering section, that she was standing close enough that he could smell that starlight and midnight rain scent even over the coolant fluid, and that this conversation was moving into territory that could get him executed for presumption. I think, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, they should choose someone who sees them as a person first, and everything else second. The silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of machinery and possibilities that Marcus didn't dare name. Then Princess Lyrelay smiled, and it was nothing like the polite, practiced smiles he'd seen her wear during the public ceremonies. This was genuine and warm and just a little bit wicked. Marcus Chen, she said, I think you may be the most dangerous person I've met on this station. Before he could ask what she meant by that, alarms started blaring throughout the engineering section. Emergency lights flashed as an automated voice announced that the princess was missing and all station security was to report to duty stations immediately. I should go, she said, but she didn't move away from him. Yes, Marcus agreed, making no move to step back either. There will be questions about what happened. I'll tell them the support beam failed and I helped you get out safely. And if they ask why we were both covered in coolant? Ruptured line during the structural collapse. She smiled again, and Marcus felt his world tilt slightly off its axis. You're going to lie to protect me? I'm going to tell them exactly what happened, just not all of it. Princess Lirelei reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers cool against his skin. What makes you think I need protecting, Marcus Chen? The question hung in the air between them as the alarms continued to blare and the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors. Marcus knew that in a moment security would arrive and this strange, impossible interlude would be over. She would go back to being the princess, surrounded by suitors and ceremony and the weight of galactic politics. But for now, for just this moment, she was looking at him like he was the most interesting thing in the universe, and Marcus found himself believing that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was about to become a much more complicated place. The footsteps were getting closer, and Princess Lirelei stepped back, her expression shifting into the composed mask of royalty. But just before the security team rounded the corner, she leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Thank you for the most honest conversation I've had in 300 years. Then she was gone, swept away by concerned guards and worried diplomats, leaving Marcus alone in the engineering section with the lingering scent of starlight and midnight rain, wondering if he had just imagined the whole impossible encounter. 3 days after the maintenance tunnel incident, Marcus was trying very hard to pretend his life had returned to normal. He'd filed his incident report, requisitioned new uniforms to replace the coolant-soaked ones, and thrown himself into his work with even more dedication than usual. The atmospheric processors were running smoothly, the environmental controls were perfectly calibrated, and he'd even managed to fix the persistent humidity problem in the Aquarian delegation's quarters. What he couldn't fix was the way his mind kept drifting to silver eyes and genuine smiles, or the way he found himself taking maintenance routes that passed through sections of the station where he might catch a glimpse of the sanguinary princess. He was recalibrating a gravity generator in the lower decks when his comm unit chimed with an urgent message. Marcus glanced at the display and frowned. It was from Chief Engineer Rodriguez, marked Priority 1. "Chen, report to my office immediately." Marcus secured the gravity generator and made his way through the maze of corridors to the engineering section's administrative level. Chief Rodriguez was a no-nonsense woman who had worked her way up from maintenance tech to chief engineer over 30 years. She didn't waste time with small talk or unnecessary meetings, which made the urgent summons even more concerning. The door to her office slid open as Marcus approached, and he stepped inside to find Rodriguez standing behind her desk with an expression he couldn't quite read. Standing beside her was Commander Tail, the station's head of security, whose presence made Marcus's stomach drop. "Sir, ma'am," Marcus said, coming to attention. Rodriguez gestured for him to sit. "Relax, Chen. You're not in trouble. At least, not yet." Commander Thale, a tall Alterian with the characteristic blue-tinted skin and silver hair of his species, studied Marcus with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Engineer Chen, your incident report from 3 days ago has raised some questions." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Sir, you state that you were performing routine maintenance when a structural failure resulted in Princess Lirelei falling into your work area. You then assisted her in exiting through a secondary maintenance hatch." "That's correct, sir." "The princess corroborated your account," Rodriguez said, watching Marcus's face carefully. "In fact, she specifically praised your quick thinking and professionalism." Marcus felt a flutter of something he didn't want to examine too closely. "I was just doing my job, ma'am." Commander Thale leaned forward. "The interesting thing, Engineer Chen, is that the princess has made an unusual request. She wants to tour the station's engineering systems. All of them. And she specifically requested you as her guide." The words hit Marcus like a plasma discharge. "Sir, apparently," Rodriguez said, her tone carefully neutral, "Her Highness was impressed by your knowledge of multi-species environmental requirements. She expressed interest in understanding how the station's life support systems function." Marcus's mouth went dry. "I see. Do you, Chen?" Commander Thale stood up, his full height making the office feel suddenly smaller. "Because I'm having trouble understanding why the heir to the sanguinary throne would want a private tour of maintenance areas with a third-class engineer, especially when she has 37 princes from the most powerful species in the galaxy competing for her attention." The implications hung heavy in the air. Marcus knew exactly what the commander was thinking, and he couldn't blame him. From the outside, it looked suspicious at best, and potentially catastrophic at worst. Sir, Marcus said carefully, I can't speak to Her Highness's motivations. I can only say that I answered her questions about the atmospheric systems as accurately as possible. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. The tour is approved, Chen, but you're going to have conditions. Commander Thale will assign a security detail to accompany you. You will stick to public engineering areas only. And you will remember at all times that you're dealing with someone whose political importance cannot be overstated. Understood, ma'am. One more thing, Commander Thale added. There are rumors circulating among the various delegations. Some of the princes are displeased with the princess's interest in station operations. Prince Zirian of the Draconic Houses has been particularly vocal about what he calls inappropriate fraternization with lesser species. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Sir, just be aware, Chen, that your interactions with the princess are being watched by people who have a lot to lose if she makes an unexpected choice. These are not people who react well to threats to their ambitions. The meeting ended with Marcus feeling like he was walking through a minefield. As he made his way back to the lower decks, he tried to process what had just happened. Princess Lirelei wanted to see him again. She had specifically requested him as her guide. But why? He didn't have long to wonder. His comm unit chimed again, this time with a message that made his heart race. Engineer Chen, please report to Observation Deck 7 at 1800 hours for the scheduled engineering tour. Princess Lirelei. Marcus looked at his chronometer. 1800 hours was in 2 hours, barely enough time to clean up and make himself presentable. He hurried back to his quarters, showered quickly, and put on his cleanest uniform. As he was adjusting his collar, he caught sight of himself in the mirror and paused. He looked nervous. More than nervous, he looked like someone who was about to do something that could change his life forever. The smart thing would be to conduct a professional tour, answer the princess's questions politely, and then return to his normal routine. The safe thing would be to remember that she was royalty and he was nobody, that she had dozens of princes competing for her attention, and that getting involved in galactic politics was a sure way to end up dead. But as Marcus made his way to Observation Deck 7, he found he didn't much care about the smart thing or the safe thing. He cared about seeing her smile again. Observation Deck 7 was one of the station's premier viewing areas, with massive transparent aluminum windows that provided a stunning view of the surrounding nebula. When Marcus arrived, he found Princess Lirelei standing alone at the windows, silhouetted against the swirling colors of cosmic dust and starlight. She had changed from the formal gowns she wore to public events into something more practical. Dark pants and a fitted jacket that still managed to look elegant while being suitable for walking through engineering sections. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore minimal jewelry except for the circlet that marked her rank. Your Highness, Marcus said, approaching carefully. She turned, and her face lit up with what looked like genuine pleasure at seeing him. Marcus, thank you for agreeing to this. Of course, Your Highness. Though I should mention that Commander Tale has assigned a security detail to accompany us. Princess Lirelei glanced around the empty observation deck and smiled. I may have suggested to the good commander that a discreet security presence would be preferable to obvious escorts. I believe we're being monitored from a distance. Marcus looked around, but saw no sign of security personnel. Your Highness, if you don't mind my asking, why did you request this tour? She moved away from the windows, walking closer to him. Several reasons. First, I was genuinely interested in understanding how you maintain life support for so many different species. It's a remarkable achievement that gets very little recognition. And second? Her smile turned slightly wicked. Second, I find myself curious about the man who tackled me into a maintenance tunnel and then treated me like a person instead of a political symbol. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Your Highness, please call me Lirelei, at least when we're alone. The request was so unexpected that Marcus forgot to respond for a moment. I'm not sure that would be appropriate. Marcus, she said, and the way she said his name made something flutter in his chest. I have spent 3 centuries being addressed by titles and formal names. In all that time, do you know how many people have called me by my actual name? Your family? My parents have been dead for 200 years. My advisors call me Your Highness or Princess. The princes competing for my hand call me your radiance, or my lady, or various flowery epithets that sound like they were composed by committee. She paused, looking out at the nebula. I honestly can't remember the last time someone used my name simply because it was my name. Marcus studied her profile, seeing something vulnerable in her expression that made his chest tight. Lyralee, he said quietly, testing the sound of it. She turned back to him with a smile that was radiant and sad at the same time. Thank you. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the slow dance of stellar gases outside the windows. Then Lyralee straightened, seeming to shake off her melancholy. Now then, I believe you promised me a tour of the most impressive life support systems in the galaxy. Marcus grinned, feeling more at ease than he had since receiving the tour request. Right this way, your Lyralee. He led her through the engineering sections, explaining how the atmospheric processors worked, showing her the environmental monitoring stations, and demonstrating the gravity control systems. To his surprise and delight, she asked intelligent questions and seemed genuinely fascinated by the complex technologies that kept the station habitable. This is incredible, she said as they stood in the main atmospheric control center. You're essentially creating and maintaining 37 different worlds within one structure. More than that, actually. Some species have individuals with special requirements due to age, medical conditions, or personal preferences. We currently maintain 40 distinct environmental zones. She shook her head in amazement. And you coordinate all of this? The team does. Each of us specializes in different systems, but we all need to understand how they interact. Change the pressure in one section, and it affects the airflow in 6 others. Adjust the temperature for the thermal delegation, and the cooling systems for the crystalline species have to compensate. Lyralee walked over to the main display, which showed a 3-dimensional map of the station with different colors indicating various environmental zones. It's like a puzzle with thousands of pieces that are constantly moving. That's actually a perfect description. She turned to face him, her expression serious. Marcus, do you realize how extraordinary this is? What you do here? It's just engineering? No, she said firmly. It's not just anything. You've created something that allows dozens of species who evolved on completely different worlds to live and work together in harmony. You've solved problems that most civilizations never even think about. And you do it so well that people take it for granted. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone with the right training could do it. Could they? Lyralee moved closer to him, her eyes intense. Could Prince Zirian of the Draconic Houses maintain life support for Aquarians when his species considers water-breathing creatures to be inferior? Could Prince Valthan of the Eternal Council remember the atmospheric needs of short-lived species he considers beneath notice? Your Highness, Lyralee, I think you might be overestimating Marcus. She reached out and touched his arm gently. I've spent 3 weeks listening to princes boast about their conquests, their wealth, their political connections. Not one of them has demonstrated the kind of genuine care for other beings that you show every day simply by doing your job well. The words hung between them, loaded with implications that Marcus was afraid to examine. He was very aware of her hand on his arm, of the way she was looking at him, of the fact that they were alone in the atmospheric control center with no one else around. Lyralee, he said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly.
Of course. Why are you really here?
Why this tour? Why the interest in engineering systems? Why, he gestured between them. Why this? She was quiet for a long moment, her hand still resting on his arm. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. Because in 300 years of existence, you're the first person who has made me feel like I might actually be capable of love.
Marcus's breath caught.
Lyralee, I know it's impossible, she continued quickly. I know you're human and I'm sanguinary. That there are political implications, that there are dozens of reasons why this could never work. But I also know that when I'm with you, I feel like myself instead of like a political symbol or a prize to be won. They stood facing each other in the soft light of the control room displays, the hum of machinery providing a backdrop to words that could change the fate of empires. Marcus knew he should step back, should remember his place, should think about the consequences. Instead, he reached up and covered her hand with his. Lyrelay, he said, I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever comes of this, you're not just a princess to me. You're the most fascinating, intelligent, beautiful person I've ever met. And if that's presumptuous or inappropriate, then I guess I'm both of those things too. Her smile was radiant. Marcus Chen, you are definitely the most dangerous person I've met on this station. Before he could ask what she meant by that, the control room's main door chimed with an incoming priority message. Marcus reluctantly stepped away from Lyrelay and activated the display. Commander Thales' face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. Engineer Chen, Princess Lyrelay, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. We have a situation. The display went dark, leaving them alone with the sudden tension of crisis. Lyrelay straightened, and Marcus watched her transform from the woman who had just confessed her feelings into the princess who would one day rule a galactic empire. It seems our tour has been interrupted, she said, her voice once again carrying the authority of royalty. Yes, Your Highness. She paused at his return to formality, then nodded with understanding. Come, Marcus, let's go see what crisis requires our immediate attention. As they made their way through the corridors toward the conference room, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that whatever awaited them there would change everything. The galaxy had seemed vast and full of possibilities just moments before. Now it felt like it was closing in around them, full of politics and dangers and people who would do anything to prevent the impossible love story that was beginning to unfold between a vampire princess and a human engineer. But as they walked side by side through the station's corridors, Marcus realized he didn't care about the dangers or the politics or the impossibility of it all. For the first time in his life, he had something worth fighting for, something worth the risk. He just hoped they would both survive what came next. Conference Room Alpha was filled with tension so thick Marcus could practically taste it when he and Lyrelay arrived. The room's long table was surrounded by representatives from the major delegations, their various forms and species creating a tableau of barely contained hostility. Commander Thales stood at the head of the table, his expression grim, while Chief Engineer Rodriguez sat nearby with a data pad that she was gripping tightly enough to crack. Prince Zirian of the Draconic Houses dominated one end of the table, his 7-foot frame covered in scales that shifted from deep red to black depending on his mood. Currently, they were decidedly on the black side, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus with undisguised contempt as they entered the room. Beside him sat Prince Valthan of the Eternal Council, whose species looked deceptively human except for the silver hair, pale skin, and eyes that held the weight of millennia. He was studying his hands with the kind of forced calm that suggested barely controlled rage. Prince Zephys of the Zephyrian Mind Lords floated slightly above his chair, his translucent form shimmering with psychic energy. His telepathic abilities were kept carefully shielded in mixed company, but Marcus could feel the pressure of his attention like a weight behind his eyes. The other princes and representatives filled out the rest of the table, each radiating their own particular brand of displeasure. It was like being in a room full of apex predators who had just been told their prey had escaped. Princess, Commander Thales said as Lyrelay took her place at the head of the table opposite him, I've called this meeting to address some concerns that have been raised by your suitors. Marcus remained standing near the door, uncertain of his place in this gathering of galactic nobility. Lyrelay noticed his hesitation and gestured to an empty chair beside her. Engineer Chen, please join us. I believe your presence is relevant to this discussion. The invitation sent a ripple of reaction through the assembled princes. Prince Zirian's scales darkened further, while Prince Valthan's calm expression cracked enough to show a flash of something dangerous. Marcus took the offered seat, acutely aware that he was probably the only person in the room who couldn't level a city with their bare hands or personal technology. The thought was not particularly comforting. Now then, Commander Thale continued, Prince Zirian has filed a formal complaint regarding what he terms inappropriate conduct between Princess Lyrelay and station personnel. Prince Zirian rose to his full imposing height, his voice a rumble that seemed to make the room's structure vibrate. Princess, with all due respect, your behavior has become a subject of concern among your potential consorts. Spending private time with a maintenance worker, requesting tours of service areas, showing favor to, he looked at Marcus with disgust, lesser beings. It reflects poorly on the dignity of your position. Lyrelay's voice was, ice when she replied. Prince Zirian, are you suggesting that learning about the systems that keep this station operational is beneath my notice? I am suggesting, Zirian replied, his golden eyes burning, that there are more appropriate ways to gain such knowledge than private encounters with insignificant personnel. The word insignificant hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because it wounded his pride, but because he could see what it did to Lyrelai. Her expression didn't change, but something cold and dangerous flickered in her eyes. Insignificant, she repeated, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. Prince Zirian, do you know what happens if the atmospheric systems on this station fail? Princess, that is hardly relevant to... Answer the question. Zirian's scales rippled with irritation. The station's population would need to evacuate or face atmospheric poisoning. How long would they have? That would depend on the nature of the failure. Lyrelai turned to Marcus. Engineer Chen? Marcus cleared his throat, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Depending on the specific system failure and the species in question, anywhere from 4 minutes to 6 hours, humans would have about 20 minutes in a standard atmospheric failure scenario. And how many different atmospheric compositions are currently maintained on this station? 43 distinct environmental zones, Princess. 43, Lyrelai repeated, looking back at Prince Zirian. And Engineer Chen can maintain all of them simultaneously, ensuring that 30,000 beings from dozens of species can breathe safely every day. Tell me, Prince Zirian, what have you done recently that has kept 30,000 people alive? The silence that followed was deafening. Prince Zirian's scales had turned completely black, and Marcus could practically feel the heat radiating from his fury. Prince Valthan chose that moment to interject, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. Princess, while we appreciate Engineer Chen's technical competence, surely you understand our concern. You are the heir to the Sanguinari throne. Your choice of consort will affect the balance of power throughout the galaxy. So, these private meetings with a human worker suggest a lack of proper consideration for your responsibilities. My responsibilities, Lyrelai said, her tone deceptively mild, include ensuring the prosperity and survival of my people. Tell me, Prince Valthan, what do you know about human resilience? Princess, it's a simple question. What do you know about the species you so readily dismiss? Prince Valthan looked uncomfortable. They are short-lived, physically weak, possess no natural armor or extraordinary abilities. They are adequate for menial tasks. Lyrelai smiled, and Marcus recognized the expression from their first meeting. It was the smile that meant someone was about to learn something they probably didn't want to know. Chief Rodriguez Lyrelai said, "Would you please share the maintenance records for the past 5 years?" Chief Rodriguez activated her datapad, projecting holographic displays above the table. These are the system failure reports and repair records for major station systems over the past 5 years. The displays showed a staggering amount of data: atmospheric failures, power grid problems, gravity generator malfunctions, life support emergencies, dozens of critical situations that could have killed thousands of people. Now show them the response times and resolution rates. New data appeared, showing how quickly each crisis had been resolved and who had been responsible for the repairs. Marcus felt his face burning as he realized what the data revealed. Interesting, Lyrelai said, studying the displays. It appears that Engineer Chen has personally resolved 67% of all critical life support failures over the past 3 years. His average response time is 4 minutes faster than the next best engineer, and he has a 100% success rate in preventing casualties. She turned back to Prince Valthan. This insignificant human has personally saved more lives in the past 3 years than most species save in a century. And he's done it not for glory or recognition, but because it was his job. Prince Zephys finally spoke, his mental voice carrying an edge of psychic pressure that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Princess, your point is noted, but it does not address the fundamental issue. You are entertaining romantic feelings for a being so far beneath your station that the concept itself is absurd. The psychic pressure increased, and Marcus felt something probing at the edges of his mind. It was like having someone rifle through his thoughts, looking for secrets and weaknesses. But then Lyrelai was there, her own mental presence stepping between Marcus and the Zephyrian prince like a shield of silver light. The psychic pressure vanished instantly, and Prince Zephes recoiled as if he'd been burned. "Prince Zephes," Lyrelai said, her voice carrying undertones that made the air in the room feel electric. "You will not use your abilities on anyone in this room without explicit permission. Consider this your only warning." The Zephyrian's form flickered with surprise and what might have been fear. "Princess, I was merely... You were violating the mind of a being under my protection. In sanguinary law, that is considered an act of war." The room fell completely silent. Marcus could feel the political implications crashing through the assembled representatives like a shockwave. Lyrelai had just claimed him as being under her personal protection, a declaration that carried enormous political and personal weight. Prince Exirian's voice was barely controlled when he spoke. "Princess, surely you cannot mean to suggest that this human is worthy of your consideration as a consort." Lyrelai stood, and suddenly the room felt smaller. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone born to rule empires. "I am suggesting nothing. I am stating clearly that Engineer Marcus Chen has shown me more genuine respect, intelligence, and care in 3 days than any of you have managed in 3 weeks. He sees me as a person before he sees me as a princess. He values my thoughts over my political connections, and when I needed help, he provided it, without asking what he might gain in return." She looked around the room, meeting each prince's gaze in turn. "You speak of my responsibilities and my position, but not one of you has asked what I want or what might make me happy. You discuss trade agreements and military alliances and the political advantages of marriage to me, but none of you have wondered if I might want a partner who loves me for who I am rather than what I represent." "Princess," Prince Valthan said carefully, "romantic feelings are a luxury that those in our positions cannot always afford." "Cannot afford?" Lyrelai's laugh was sharp and bright and completely without humor. "Prince Valthan, I am 300 years old. I have devoted my entire existence to duty, responsibility, and the good of my people. I have never once chosen something for myself, never once acted on my own desires, never once put my personal happiness before political necessity." She turned to look at Marcus, her expression softening. "Until now." The declaration hit the room like a bomb. Marcus felt his heart stop, restart, and then begin beating so fast he was sure everyone could hear it. She was choosing him, publicly, in front of the most powerful princes in the galaxy. She was choosing a human maintenance engineer over empires and alliances and centuries of political tradition. Prince Zirian erupted from his chair, his scales now glowing with heat. "This is madness. You would throw away the stability of the galaxy for a fleeting attraction to an inferior species?" "Inferior?" Lyrelai's voice cracked like a whip. "Prince Zirian, I challenge you to prove that claim." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. In galactic law, a formal challenge from royalty could not be refused without dishonor, but what she was suggesting was impossible. "Princess," Commander Thale said quickly, "perhaps we should consider—" "I invoke the right of trial by combat," Lyrelai continued, her words falling like hammer blows. "Prince Zirian claims that humans are inferior. I say they are not. Let him prove his assertion in the arena." Prince Zirian's grin was savage. "Gladly, Princess, but I assume you don't intend to fight me yourself." "No," Lyrelai said, and Marcus felt the universe shift around them. "My champion will be Engineer Marcus Chen." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. She had just challenged one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy to single combat, and she had named him as her champion. Marcus stood on shaking legs looking around the room at faces filled with shock, anger, and what looked disturbingly like anticipation. Prince Zirian was grinning like a predator who had just been offered his favorite prey. "Lyrelai," Marcus said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." She nodded, and they stepped out of the conference room into the corridor beyond. The moment the door closed behind them, Marcus grabbed her hands. "Lyrelai, what have you done?" "What I should have done the moment they started treating you like you were beneath their notice." I'm going to die, Marcus said, surprising himself with how calm he sounded. You realize that, right? Prince Zirian is a trained warrior from a species that evolved for combat. I'm a maintenance engineer. This isn't going to be a fight, it's going to be an execution. Lyralei's hands tightened on his. Marcus, listen to me. I have spent 3 centuries studying every species in the galaxy. I know their strengths, their weaknesses, their fighting styles. Prince Zirian is powerful and fast and deadly, but he has one critical flaw. What's that? He underestimates humans. They all do. Her eyes blazed with fierce pride. But I don't. I've seen what humans can do when they're fighting for something they believe in. You don't have their strength or their speed or their natural weapons, but you have something they don't. What? You have the ability to find solutions that no one else would think of. You have the capacity to keep going when anyone sensible would give up. And most importantly, you'll be fighting for love instead of pride. Marcus looked into her eyes and saw absolute faith in him. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely insane. Lyralei, even if by some miracle I win, what then? The other princes won't accept this. The political ramifications. She silenced him by reaching up and kissing him softly. When she pulled back, her smile was radiant. Marcus Chen, I have spent 300 years being practical and political and responsible. For once in my existence, I'm going to bet everything on love. The conference room doors opened, and Commander Thaley emerged with the assembled princes behind him. The challenge has been formally accepted, he announced. The trial by combat will take place tomorrow at sunset in the main arena. Single combat, no weapons, victory by submission or, he paused, looking uncomfortable, victory by death. Prince Zirian pushed past the others, his golden eyes fixed on Marcus with predatory hunger. Human, I almost feel sorry for you. Almost. As the princes filed past them, heading back to their quarters to prepare for what they clearly expected to be entertainment, Marcus realized that he had less than 24 hours to figure out how to defeat a 7-foot-tall dragon prince in hand-to-hand combat. The smart thing would be to forfeit, to apologize to Lyralei and explain that some battles couldn't be won through determination alone. But as he looked at her face, saw the faith and love shining in her eyes, Marcus realized that he was about to do something completely insane. He was going to fight a dragon for the woman he loved. And somehow, some way, he was going to find a way to win. Marcus spent the night before the combat doing something that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. He was studying engineering manuals and atmospheric composition charts instead of combat techniques or weapons training. While Prince Zirian was undoubtedly practicing devastating fighting moves, Marcus was reviewing the technical specifications of the arena's environmental systems. Chief Engineer Rodriguez had tried to talk him out of the fight, as had Commander Thaley and every other station officer who had heard about the challenge. But when they realized he was determined to go through with it, they had offered what help they could. Rodriguez had given him access to every technical manual in the station's database, while Commander Thaley had provided detailed information about draconic combat styles and biological vulnerabilities. The problem was that draconic vulnerabilities were few and far between. Prince Zirian species had evolved on a high-gravity world with a toxic atmosphere and predators that made nightmares look friendly. They were stronger than humans, faster than humans, more durable than humans, and equipped with natural weapons that could shred metal. Marcus was beginning to understand why the other princes had looked so entertained by Lyralei's challenge. He was reviewing atmospheric pressure differentials when his door chimed. Marcus opened it to find Lyralei standing in the corridor, looking more nervous than he had ever seen her. "May I come in?"
Of course.
She entered his small quarters, looking around at the technical manuals scattered everywhere, the holographic displays showing arena schematics, and the environmental data covering every available surface. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "Research. This isn't combat preparation. This is engineering analysis." Marcus gestured to a holographic display showing the arena's atmospheric control systems. "Lyralei, I can't beat Prince Zirian in a straight fight. He's bigger, stronger, faster, and trained for combat. But maybe I don't have to beat him in a straight fight." She moved closer, studying the displays. "What do you mean?" "The arena has its own environmental controls, separate from the main station systems. They're designed to maintain standard atmosphere for mixed species events, but they can be adjusted for specific requirements. Marcus, using the environmental systems would be cheating. Would it? Marcus called up another display, this one showing the formal rules of trial by combat. Look at the regulations. No weapons, no external assistance, victory by submission or death. Nothing about environmental manipulation being forbidden. Lorelei read through the rules carefully. You're right, but Marcus, even if you could somehow adjust the atmosphere, how would that help? Prince Zirian's species can survive in conditions that would kill most beings. True, but optimal survival and peak combat performance are two different things. Marcus highlighted specific data points on his displays. Draconic species evolved in high-pressure, low-oxygen environments. They're adapted to those conditions, but adaptation works both ways. Put them in optimal conditions for other species, and their performance actually decreases slightly. Slightly isn't going to be enough. No, but it's a start. Marcus called up more data. Lorelei, I've spent 3 years maintaining environmental systems for every species in the galaxy. I know exactly how atmospheric conditions affect performance, reaction time, muscle efficiency, even cognitive function. If I can adjust the arena's environment to optimize my performance while reducing his, it might even the odds enough to give me a chance. Lorelei was quiet for a long moment, studying the data. Marcus, this is incredibly dangerous. If you're wrong about any of this, if the environmental changes don't work the way you think they will, you'll die. And if I fight him straight up, I'll definitely die. She reached out and took his hands, her touch cool and comforting. Are you sure about this? Because if you are, I can help. How? Sanguinary nobles are required to learn the environmental preferences of all major species. It's considered essential knowledge for diplomacy. I know things about draconic physiology that might not be in your technical manuals. Marcus felt a surge of hope, such as? Their scales regulate body temperature by changing color and reflectivity. In high-temperature environments, they become more reflective to dissipate heat. But that process requires specific atmospheric pressure ratios to function efficiently. And if those ratios are off, they overheat. Their reaction time slows, their strength decreases, and they become increasingly aggressive but less controlled. Marcus stared at the data, pieces of a solution beginning to form in his mind. Lorelei, I think I have an idea. But I'm going to need to access the arena's environmental controls during the fight.
How?
The control systems are in a separate area, and you'll be in the arena with Prince Zirian trying to kill you. Marcus smiled for the first time since the challenge had been issued. That's where being a maintenance engineer comes in handy. Every system on this station has manual overrides and emergency controls, including the arena. The next evening, as the sun set beyond Concordia Prime's massive viewports, the arena filled with representatives from every delegation on the station. Word of the impossible challenge had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to witness what was expected to be the shortest trial by combat in galactic history. The arena itself was a marvel of engineering, a circular space 300 meters in diameter with seating for 10,000 spectators. The floor was made of adaptive smart metal that could be reconfigured for different types of combat, and the environmental controls could simulate conditions from dozens of different worlds. Marcus stood in the preparation chamber, wearing the simple combat outfit that regulations required. Flexible pants, a sleeveless shirt, and soft shoes that provided traction but no protection. He looked across the arena to where Prince Zirian waited in his own preparation chamber. And even at this distance, he could see the Draconic Prince's confidence. Last chance to withdraw, Commander Thales said, appearing beside Marcus. No one would think less of you. Yes, they would. And more importantly, I would. Chief Rodriguez stepped up on his other side. Chen, I've programmed an emergency medical transport. The moment this goes bad, we'll get you to the medical bay. Thanks, Chief, but I'm hoping it won't come to that. Lorelei appeared in the preparation chamber, wearing the formal robes of sanguinary royalty. Her face was composed, but Marcus could see the worry in her eyes. The environmental controls are set to standard atmospheric mixture, she said quietly. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be. She reached up and touched his face gently. Marcus, whatever happens, I want you to know that you've already won. You've shown the galaxy that humans are capable of something none of them expected. What's that? Love that's worth dying for? The arena's announcement system chimed, and a holographic herald appeared in the center of the combat space. Citizens of the Galactic Confederation, we are gathered to witness a trial by combat between Prince Zirian of the Draconic Houses and Engineer Marcus Chen of Earth, acting as champion for Princess Lyrelay of the Sanguinari. Let the combatants enter the arena. Marcus walked through the entrance tunnel, emerging into the arena to a mixture of cheers and boos from the crowd. He could see the various delegations in their designated seating areas, the princes who had been competing for Lyrelay's hand, watching with expressions ranging from amusement to anticipation. Prince Zirian entered from the opposite side, and the crowd erupted in appreciation for the imposing figure he cut. 7 feet of muscle and scales, with claws that gleamed in the arena lighting and golden eyes that promised violence. He moved with the fluid grace of a born predator, and Marcus could feel the confidence radiating from him. They met in the center of the arena, standing 10 feet apart as the herald read the formal combat rules. This is trial by combat, with victory determined by submission or death. No weapons are permitted, no outside assistance is allowed, and the combat continues until one combatant yields or falls. Are both fighters ready? Ready, Prince Zirian rumbled, his voice carrying easily through the arena. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling for the manual environmental override control he had located during his preparation. It was disguised as a decorative element in the arena floor, positioned exactly where he needed it to be. Ready, he said. Then let combat begin. Prince Zirian moved with blinding speed, covering the distance between them in a single leap. His clawed hand swept toward Marcus's head with enough force to decapitate him. But Marcus had been expecting the attack. He dropped low and rolled sideways, coming up near the environmental control override. The crowd roared as Prince Zirian spun and launched another attack, this one a sweeping kick that would have shattered Marcus's ribs if it had connected. Instead, Marcus threw himself backward, his hand finding the concealed control panel. Running already, human? Prince Zirian taunted, advancing with predatory confidence. I expected at least a few minutes of entertainment. Marcus activated the environmental override, and the arena's atmospheric composition began to shift. The changes were subtle at first, invisible to the spectators but carefully calibrated to affect draconic physiology in specific ways. Prince Zirian lunged forward again, but this time Marcus stood his ground, dodging at the last second and landing a solid punch to the prince's side. It was like hitting a wall, but Marcus noticed that the prince's reaction time was just slightly slower than it had been moments before. You cannot run forever, Prince Zirian growled, but Marcus could hear a slight breathlessness in his voice that hadn't been there at the start. The atmospheric changes were working. The pressure differential was affecting the prince's scale regulation, and the modified oxygen mixture was reducing his peak efficiency. It wasn't much, but in a fight like this, every advantage mattered. Marcus continued to evade and strike, using his knowledge of the arena's layout to stay mobile while the environmental changes slowly took effect. Prince Zirian was still faster and stronger, but the gap was narrowing with each passing minute. Stand still and fight, coward! Prince Zirian roared, his scales beginning to show the first signs of color change as his body temperature rose. I am fighting, Marcus replied, dodging another swipe of razor-sharp claws, just not the way you expected. The crowd was growing restless, expecting a quick and violent end to the combat. Instead, they were watching a prolonged chase that seemed to favor neither combatant, but Marcus could see the signs that others missed. Prince Zirian's movements were becoming less precise, his breathing more labored, his attacks more aggressive but less controlled. The prince's scales were shifting from red to black, a sign that his temperature regulation was struggling with the modified atmospheric conditions. His next attack came with enough force to crack the arena floor, but it was poorly aimed and left him off balance. Marcus seized the opportunity, moving inside the prince's guard and landing a series of rapid strikes to pressure points he had memorized from Commander Thales' briefings on draconic anatomy. The blows wouldn't have fazed Prince Zirian under normal conditions, but combined with the environmental stress, they began to have an effect. Prince Zirian staggered, his golden eyes wide with surprise. For the first time since the combat began, he looked genuinely concerned. Impossible, he hissed. You're just human. Yeah, Marcus said, breathing hard but still moving. Just human. The prince launched himself forward in a desperate attack, all claws and fury and primal rage. But his movements were sluggish now, his coordination affected by the atmospheric changes. Marcus sidestepped the assault and grabbed the prince's extended arm, using the draconic warrior's own momentum to throw him to the ground. The arena fell silent as Prince Zirian crashed into the smart metal floor with enough force to create a crater. He lay there for a moment stunned, his scales flickering between colors as his body struggled to adapt to the modified environment. Marcus stood over him, every muscle in his body screaming with fatigue but his mind sharp with adrenaline and determination. "Yield," he said quietly. Prince Zirian tried to rise, but his movements were unsteady. The atmospheric modifications had pushed his physiology past its optimal range, and his body was beginning to shut down non-essential functions to cope with the stress. "Yield," Marcus repeated, louder this time. The prince's golden eyes burned with hatred and disbelief, but he could no longer stand. His proud head dropped to the arena floor in defeat. "I yield," he whispered, the words carrying clearly through the stunned silence. The arena erupted in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species were on their feet shouting in languages Marcus didn't recognize. The other princes looked like they had just witnessed the impossible, which, in a way, they had. But Marcus only had eyes for one person. Lyrelay was standing in the royal box, tears streaming down her face and her hands pressed to her heart. When their eyes met across the arena, her smile was radiant enough to power the station's energy grid. The holographic herald reappeared, his voice struggling to be heard over the crowd. "Victory to Engineer Marcus Chen, champion of Princess Lyrelay. The trial by combat is concluded." Marcus looked down at Prince Zirian, who was slowly recovering as the arena's atmosphere returned to normal. The prince's eyes held a grudging respect along with his anger. "How?" Prince Zirian asked. Marcus helped him to his feet, surprising the draconic prince with the gesture of respect. "Same way I keep 30,000 people breathing every day. I used the tools available and adapted to the situation." Prince Zirian studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are not what I expected, human." "Neither are you," Marcus replied honestly. As medical teams checked both combatants and the crowd slowly began to disperse, Marcus made his way toward the exit where Lyrelay was waiting. He was bruised, exhausted, and fairly sure he had used up several lifetimes' worth of luck in the past 20 minutes. But he had won. Against all odds, against all expectations, against the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy, a human maintenance engineer had emerged victorious. And waiting for him at the end of it all was the woman he loved, who had believed in him even when he hadn't believed in himself. The galaxy would never be the same. The celebration in Princess Lyrelay's quarters that night was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Representatives from dozens of species had come to congratulate him on his victory, bringing gifts and offers of alliance that would have made his head spin if he had been paying attention to them. But Marcus only had eyes for Lyrelay, who had barely left his side since the combat ended. "I still can't believe you won," she said as they stood together on her private balcony, looking out at the swirling colors of the nebula beyond the station. The celebrations were winding down, and most of the guests had returned to their quarters, leaving them finally alone. "Honestly, neither can I," Marcus admitted. "For a while there, I thought I was going to become the shortest-lived champion in galactic history." Lyrelay moved closer to him, her hand finding his. "Marcus, what you did today changed everything. Not just for us, but for how humans will be viewed throughout the galaxy. I hope that's a good thing." "It is." She turned to face him fully, her silver eyes reflecting the starlight. "Before today, humans were considered a minor species, useful for certain tasks but not particularly noteworthy. Now, every major power in the galaxy is going to have to reconsider that assessment." Marcus thought about the conversations he'd had throughout the evening. Prince Valthan had approached him with what sounded like genuine respect, asking detailed questions about human problem-solving techniques. Even Prince Zephes had seemed intrigued by what he called Marcus's unconventional strategic thinking. "The marriage proposals have already started," Lyrelay continued, her tone amused. 3 different species have suggested alliance marriages between their noble houses and prominent human families. And how do you feel about that?" I think it's ironic that it took a human maintenance engineer defeating a draconic prince in single combat to make them realize that your species might be worth taking seriously. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the slow dance of cosmic gases beyond the viewports. Then Marcus turned to face her, his expression serious. Lyreley, we need to talk about what happens next.
What do you mean?
I mean this. Marcus gestured between them. Us. The fact that you're a princess who will one day rule an empire, and I'm a maintenance engineer from Earth, the fact that there are political implications to your choice that neither of us can ignore. Lyreley was quiet for a long moment, her hand still holding his. Marcus, are you having second thoughts? No, he said quickly, not about you, never about you. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't worried about what choosing me means for your people and your responsibilities. My responsibilities, she repeated thoughtfully. Do you know what the first responsibility of a ruler is, Marcus? To protect and serve your people? To ensure the survival and prosperity of your species for future generations? She turned to look out at the nebula again. For 3 centuries, I've been told that the best way to do that was through political marriages, military alliances, and the careful balancing of power between galactic factions. And now? Now I think there might be a better way. Lyreley's voice carried a note of excitement that made Marcus's pulse quicken. Marcus, what if instead of trying to balance the existing power structures, we changed them entirely? What do you mean? Think about what happened today. You defeated Prince Zirion not through superior strength or traditional combat skills, but through intelligence, adaptability, and creative problem-solving. You used resources that were available to everyone but that no one else thought to use. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand where she was going with this. That's quintessentially human, Lyreley continued. Every species in the galaxy has their particular strengths. Draconic warriors are incredibly powerful. Zephyrian mind lords have psychic abilities. Eternals have vast lifespans and accumulated wisdom. But humans have something that might be more valuable than any of those advantages. Which is? The ability to find solutions that no one else would consider. The capacity to adapt to any situation. The willingness to keep trying when everyone else has given up. She squeezed his hand.